Ivanu la Asok
Asok
V'divrei
V'divrei
Torah.
Torah.
Amen. So, as you know, we've done the whole Song of Songs, and last week we talked about love in Judaism, and this week we're talking about sex in
I'll
Judaism.
call you when
And basically, I think the topic is done, and we have 2 more months after today to continue studying. So I just wanted to offer some different options. We could look at, well, I did teach this class, but I don't know how many of you are in it, which was, and it's not Women's Torah, but it's 10 amazing Jewish women that you've never heard of through history, starting with Bruria in the Talmud and going to the contemporary times. These amazing women. Another thing we could do is most people have never really read the Megillah of Esther, really. You hear it, this and that, but it's much more complex than that if we wanted to actually do a look at the Megillah, because it doesn't end the way you think. It ends with like a brutal revenge bloodbath of the Jews on the non-Jews who are going to kill them. I mean, it's a pretty interesting reflection of Persian culture, and Jewish Persian culture and non-Jewish Persian culture. And so ancient, not Iranian or modern Jewish Persian culture, but in antiquity, because Persia, I saw this amazing documentary. It's on Netflix right now about Alexander the Great, which really talks about also what an enormous power Persia was in the ancient world. It really covered Europe and Asia, and it was so powerful and so rich in culture and in customs and whatever. And this story of Esther is embedded in that culture. It was written apparently around 400 BCE, and when Persia was at the height of its power. And it is kind of a daring parody on some level. It's like a reflection of Persian culture and also maybe a bit of poking fun at Persian culture at the same time. So would people be interested in looking at that idea of the Megillah and okay, and the
Yes,
court? Yeah,
I would. Yes.
Susan? Yes.
I like both ideas too. I mean,
Okay, well, there's always next year for the other one, but this one we could do the whole, because it's Purim's coming up, and there's a whole thing about the eunuchs and the power of eunuchs in the court. I mean, it's really interesting to take a look at what's in there and their names. And so let's do that. So we're going to look at.
That sounds fascinating.
Okay, and if any of you have a Tanakh, if you have a Bible, it's in there. It's the book of Esther, and if everybody had their own text, I mean, I can put it up as well, but it's nice to have your own text to look at it. And it's very easy to get that. So that's what okay, we'll do that. Okay, so now we're going to look at contemporary and also, but first, ancient Talmudic and rabbinic teachings on sex. That's funny, Pamela, yeah. Views of sex. And actually, we have to remember that it was written 2,000 years ago. Some of it might offend us, their views, but also you'll see, I noticed when I compiled these excerpts that some of them are in complete opposition to each other. In one, it says you cannot rape your wife, and another one basically says there's no such thing as raping your wife. You can do whatever you want to your wife. It's not rape because she's your wife, which, as we know, was viewed all over the world that way until what, the 70s or 80s, when they finally said that there's such a thing as raping your wife. You can't just do whatever you want. But until then, so the rabbis basically are saying, she's your wife. You can do whatever you want. And then other places they say no. So I'm going to put it up. And I think
Lorena Bobbitt, who cut out her husband's private part, that finally allowed the issue of rape. You can't rape your wife. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Well, the rabbis tend to take the point of view of the man, but they try to be, I think also, honestly, wait, I did it wrong. Hold on. I have to do share. I felt this a lot. It depends on the relationships they had with their wives. I think it depends if they had daughters. You know what I mean? I think it had to, because you can really read things in multiple ways. And I think you bring yourself to your interpretation. So we're going to take a look at that. So here is the one, sexual pleasure in Judaism is what it's called. And we're going to start looking at what it says here. Okay, Susan, why don't you start?
And God saw all that God had made and found it very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day.
So that's the text, and here's the commentary.
All of creation, including the human body, is deemed good. Our bodies are not unpleasing to God.
Keep going.
Neither sexual organs nor sexual intercourse are obscene. For how could God create something that contains an obscenity? God created man and woman and all their organs and functions with nothing obscene in them. We believe that God created nothing containing either ugliness or obscenity.
So this is a commentator, Igeret HaKodesh, from the 13th century that was interpreting this. And we know that there is a blessing, not necessarily having to do with sex, but there is a blessing that you say when you go to the bathroom, which would, is not also considered natural and not. And you thank God, it says, we thank God that everything that's open, should be open is open, and everything that should be closed is closed in our bodies. And so there's this idea that the human body and sexuality is not obscene, not ugly, not dirty, not anything like that. So, okay, one more, Susan.
Okay, sexual intercourse is an action that is important, good, and valuable to the soul. Also, and there is no act of flesh and blood that compares with it. If it is done with pure intention and a pure, clean mind, then it is called holy.
So Sefer Mor this is from the Sefaria website, which collects commentaries on a topic from all over. So these are different, Orthodox, Hasidic rabbis, medieval rabbis, who even in medieval times, living in a Christian diaspora where the highest form of physical holiness was abstinence and chastity, was actually saying something completely different. So that's just an introduction that sex is important, it's valuable, and it can even be holy if done in the right way. So that was a unique idea. Okay, Merle, do you want to read? So here's now about how to treat a woman.
When a man has taken a bride, he shall not go out with the army or be assigned to it for any purpose. He shall be exempt for 1 year for the sake of his household, to give happiness to the woman he has married.
Okay, and here's the commentary. Continue.
To give happiness, sex not for the purpose of procreation, but rather for pleasure.
So this is interesting. The rabbis interpret happiness having sexual, relationships with your wife. There is a very strong acknowledgement of sexual desire and lust. And so if in the Orthodox world, they encourage their children to get married very young, like 19, 20 or whatever, so that they're not going to be distracted or, misbehaving in the sexual realm. They get married very, very early. But this idea, that was in the Torah, and the rabbis are saying that happiness is having sex with your wife, and that it's more important than defending your country. It's more important than going off to the army. So I don't know that, I wonder, did any of you do, I know we're all older, but do marital, hi, Abby, did you want to say something?
Yeah, because there's something, in the Old Testament that says before.
Okay, we don't say Old Testament. We don't say Old Testament.
What do you say?
Tanakh.
Tanakh. Okay. Something in Tanakh. Remember, they said you can't have intercourse before you go to battle. Remember with
No, it didn't say that. It didn't
Yeah,
say
yeah, yeah. There was a rule that they couldn't have sex, and that's why whatchamacallit, that, what's her name? I can't think of anything now.
Bathsheba.
But Shiva, yeah, that's why it wouldn't have been her husband's baby, because he wasn't allowed to have sex with her before the day before in the Tanakh.
So, I didn't interpret it that way. I
Oh,
interpreted
okay,
he
okay.
said, how can I have sex and enjoy my wife while my fellows are on the battlefield? I feel disloyal enjoying myself when they're there.
Okay.
I've never heard the rabbi say that. I have heard a rabbinic interpretation, which they said that they would divorce their wives before they went to battle in case they died and they couldn't find their body or they were taken captive, so they wouldn't be an agunah, a
Well, you
change.
know better than I, but that's I had heard that. That's all.
I'm going to look into that. I know that he wouldn't do it, but I don't think it was because it was a law. I think it was because he said,
Okay.
how can I do this when my brothers are, in
Okay. I
battle?
thought it was in general. I thought it was in general. So I don't
would
know.
think
You know
they
much
would-
better than I do. I just remember that.
I would think they would all have sex the night before.
Yeah, I know. But I just remember that part. And
Yeah, that definitely did happen. Did anybody
Yeah.
else? So I was going to say, did any of you ever have marital counseling or know of your children having marital counseling where, you were told or that making a wife happy and sex is very important, and making your wife happy sexually is a part of being a good Jewish husband? Did anybody ever hear that before? Or
I don't think Rabbi Magnin ever taught premarital,
we do it now. We definitely, you
Well,
have to
yeah,
do
I
it.
mean, I think it's a lot newer than when we got married.
That's right.
I think that our kids did have premarital counseling, our daughter and son-in-law,
Right, but you don't know
But-
what was said in there.
but they didn't discuss any of it with us.
Yeah.
And I'm not
Helen?
about to ask.
Helen, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I remember learning early on, which impressed me greatly, that halacha requires the husband to give his wife pleasure. There's not a similar commandment on the woman to her husband. I found that remarkable and
Right.
memorable. And grounds for divorce are not pleasing your woman, but I think grounds for divorce for a man is his wife not giving him children. But those are very, very different grounds for divorce.
Or adultery for a woman, not a man. There's no such thing as adultery for a man, as we'll see. Because
Really?
okay,
Wait,
All
there is adultery if the woman is married.
well, yes,
If the
right,
woman
right.
is married, that also,
But if a man is married and the woman is not,
no, then that's permissible. But if the man is married and the woman is married,
they're both married. You're right. You're right. Okay, let's continue. Hold on. Share. Okay, so we talked about that. That's giving him pleasure. Helen, do you want to read?
Sure. Sexual relations are considered a dimension of Sabbath pleasure. Therefore, Torah scholars fulfill their marital obligations once a week on the Shabbat.
And also, it's considered a double mitzvah on Shabbat. So scholars, if they're going to, this is like a mitzvah, their marital obligations. You have to have sex with your wife at least once a week on Shabbat. Okay, so now this is from the Babylonian Talmud. Helen, continue.
A man is forbidden to compel his wife to have marital relations. Rabbi Joshua ben Levi similarly stated, whosoever compels his wife to have marital relations will have unworthy children.
Wow. Okay. So in this place, you can't make your wife, but apparently a wife can not compel, but demand or ask for marital relations because he's obliged at least once a week as a Torah scholar. Okay, now this is found, okay. So now the Mishnah, which is the first part of the Talmud, says, well, how often should you have sex with your wife? And it depends on your profession, how often you should have sex with your wife. So, Cindy, do you want to read?
Students who leave for the purpose of studying Torah without the consent of their wives have 30 days.
Okay, this is the
Laborers,
wait, 30 days. If you go like to a yeshiva or whatever, and your wife's saying, no, 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 you have 30 days, you have to come back and have sex. Continue.
laborers 1 week. The law of providing sexual pleasure to one's wife that is stated in the Torah is as follows. 1 at leisure, daily.
Okay, so if
Laborers,
you're a wealthy, hold on, if you're a wealthy man and you don't work daily, you need to have sex with your wife. Go ahead.
laborers twice a week. Donkey drivers once a week. Camel drivers, that's interesting that camel and donkeys are so different, once every 30 days. Navigators every 6 months. These are the words of Rabbi Eliezer.
Okay, so I think the further you are from home, the more days in between, because laborers work at home, you know. Leisure people are home all the time. Donkey driver, you're like out, but you're not gone. A camel driver, I guess, could go really far. And navigators, you're on a ship every 6 months. And the Torah scholars, for sure, once a week on Shabbat. So it's not like they leave it up to you or the husband to decide what. Okay.
But
Now,
this isn't Torah, it's interpretation.
this is Talmud. This is Talmud. Mishnah is Talmud. Ketubot is part of the Talmud about ketubas, about weddings. This is all the laws of marriage and weddings. Okay, I'm going to do one more and then we're going to talk about it. Cindy, one more.
When you and your wife are engaged in sexual union, do not behave lightheartedly and regard this act as vain, idle, improper. Therefore, first introduce her into the mood with gentle words that excite her emotion, appease her mind, and delight her with joy. Thus that's foreplay, right? Thus you unite your mind and intention with hers. Say to her words which in part arouse in her passion, closeness, love, will, and erotic desire, and in part evoke in her reverence for God, piety, and modesty. Never impose yourself upon her nor force her, for any sexual union without an abundance of passion, love, and will is without the divine presence. Do not quarrel with her nor act violently whenever coitus is involved. The Talmud says, a lion ravishes and then eats and has no shame. So acts the brute. He hits and then cohabits and has no shame. Rather court and attract her to you first with gracious and seductive, as well as refined and gentle words, so that both your intentions be for the sake of God. Do not hurry in arousing passion. Prolong till she is ready and in a passionate mood. Approach her lovingly and passionately so that she reaches her orgasm first.
Wow.
My God, this is unbelievable.
Wow.
It was written in the 13th century by this scholar called Igeret HaKodesh. The Talmud is different, as we'll look, which is like 1,000 years earlier. So basically, what is he saying? I mean, what is his rules for how to have a relationship with your wife? If you can, like, tell me what he said.
Well, he must have read the Song of Songs.
Okay, I think you're right. Oh wow, everything. So Helen, we just finished reading the Song of Songs. Why do you say that, Susan?
Well, it is, there are loving words and attempting to arouse passion, and there's extreme desire in there and longing. So I think this is, although Song of Songs doesn't necessarily say so, it's the divine presence, and from what we have.
Right.
But it is in the Tanakh. So there is some implications of divine presence, but I think this is incredible. And I don't know that people know of this, this writing in the 13th century.
Exactly. Any other thoughts about,
I'm just thinking that it's all about that you do have to please the woman, and that and how, and I guess in what way you can please the woman, or when you can please, when, I mean, but I'm shocked that in the 13th century this was, I mean, it's definitely a current philosophy, but the 13th century, did anyone think that way?
well,
And I
yeah,
guess obviously they did.
I mean, we're going to see a little bit later. I don't know why it's in this order where, you know, as I said, a woman says, my husband is raping me. And the rabbi says, well, he's your husband, so he can. So obviously things evolved over time because that was like 1,000 years previous. But why do you think that it's so important that the rabbis felt this was, or this rabbi anyway, felt this was so important as a way to have a relationship with your wife? Why? Oh, Pam, you have your hand up.
Well, I just had a thought about the other bit,
Go ahead.
but why it's important is also very interesting. I was just thinking that, we still have this like puritanical ethos that permeates the secular world, really the Christian world, right? And it's new. Like that degree of Puritanism, I think, at least in the Judeo-Christian world, it's what this tells me is it's a little bit new and post Middle Ages, because like the Catholic Church is the one that got involved in the Middle Ages to say you have to stay married, you can't get divorced, you have all these like really oppressive rules about it. But before that, women were allowed to be aroused, right? Like this is a distinct acknowledgement that women are sexual beings. Women's needs maybe are different than a man's needs, but like the fact that we even have permission, rabbinical permission to be sexual beings would be revolutionary for people to know right now. And in 1955, imagine if someone had said, oh, by the way, women, you are sexual beings. This goes back, centuries, millennia. So that's my only thought, is how amazing it is that women were acknowledged to be and supposed to be. And like, that's just how it is, right? Like that we are allowed to be sexual beings. And
it's more than that, though. I mean, I agree with you. We are sexual beings, but the obligation of the husband to treat her in this way, which is very, it's very Song of Songs. Exactly what you
Yeah, right.
But it's
but I
very
would
Song
also
of
say,
Songs. I mean, that's why I wanted to look at that. How did Song of Songs influence? Speaking beautiful words and caressing her and beguiling her and courting her and loving her, not just physically, but emotionally and with verbally and spiritually, is from that time.
I think it's particularly interesting because if you look at it from a physiological standpoint, right, all of the caressing, all of those words, they're all endorphins. They all promote the oxytocin, which is a bonding hormone, right? So if you want to have a happy, happy wife, happy life, that phrase, but there's a real biochemical response to it that then sort of just keeps the balance of the whole yin and yang of a relationship.
I agree. Susan.
Yes, so I was going to say, we're talking about nothing at that time, but that was also the time of the Kabbalah coming in, 1260, in Moshe de Leon, and then then later in Sfat. And that brings in the divine influence. I mean, I think it's primarily song and songs because all the words and caressing and all of that. But the divine influence, I think you had it circulating, maybe in not maybe, but in minority groups, nonetheless there in the air of the union of the male and the female principle.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the Shekhinah, the divine feminine.
Right.
But imagine like these young men and women get married and they're like 18, 19 years old. And a young man is given this piece of text by his rabbi to read before his wedding. Okay. What kind of marriage are they going to have? If he's like being taught something like that? Penina,
Let me just,
you're on. No, now you've muted yourself.
okay, all right.
Okay.
I'm looking at the beginning when Adam and Eve were invented or created. Okay, first of all, they were giving these choices at the first story to know between good and bad. So there is a choice that was given to two people, to the man and the woman.
Right.
I think later on, when the rabbis are reading and putting all this together, the man studied and the woman actually worked to put food on the table. If you look at Rabbi Akiva, his wife was washing clothes of the whole neighborhood so he could study. I think this whole idea was developed gradually as the important in the woman's life, she became actually a provider. So if you are a provider, you definitely deserve to be treated very nicely because your livelihood depends on that. I mean, she didn't have to go wash all the clothes in the neighborhood. She could say that she has a stomach ache and they would starve to death. So I am just looking at this whole idea of giving choices to how to have the marriage is to advance the woman's position in society altogether, especially in the Orthodox people, because we know that the women today, they are holding very big positions. My two granddaughters are working, one for a clinic for speech pathology, and the other one is a registered dietitian. And the woman who holds the clinic in both are two very Orthodox women. So on Friday, my granddaughter is not going to work. She gets a day off, even though she's not even that religious. So it's really, I think it's the way that society changed regarding the need of what's really was holding this thing together, not all the time, but a lot of the time.
Okay.
So I think that the rules came from that, because that rabbi who was sitting there teaching us how to be nice, probably his wife had a store that sold the flour and sugar and threads and
he was appreciating her
and or wash the clothes of the neighbors, the neighborhood. So that's what it is, I think, in my book.
Okay, Cindy.
Okay, to answer your question, first of all, it is teaching the man to care about the needs and feelings and pleasure of the wife. But my question was, when it gives all these rules about how often you have sex, I know later there are issues about menstruation and when you have to abstain.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
So you can't do it daily.
Right. Except when she's, menstruating, and then, so it's really, at most, it's 15 days a month of the daily, because the other 2 weeks, you're right.
That puts you in ovulation then if you wait the 15 days.
Well,
which is
that's why it's so many people get pregnant. Okay. All right. So let's continue. Lori, do you want to read? Okay, hold on. Let me just do share. All right. So that was an amazing thing. I mean, if you want to, this is something that would be great for every couple to read about how to treat your wife. Okay. Now we're talking about emotional things as well. Okay, Lori. This is also in the Talmud. Can you see it? Lori? No? Yes. Okay. Pina, do you want to read? But you're muted.
Right. Okay. Ktuvot, is that it?
Yeah.
Ktuvot? Okay. Rav Yosef taught there must be close bodily contact during sex. Unlike the custom of the Persians who perform their marital duties in clothes. This supports the ruling of Rav Huna. As Rav Huna said, a husband who says, I will not perform my marital duties unless I wear my clothes and she wear hers, must divorce her and give her the ketubah settlement. Okay.
One more.
3 things enfeeble a man's body, namely to eat standing, to drink standing, and to have marital intercourse in a standing position. Babylonian Talmud,
Okay.
Gittin.
So first of all, why do you think the rabbis felt that you needed to have bodily contact and not have sex through your clothes? And actually that negates this mythology about the Orthodox where they said, oh, the Hasidim, oh, they make love through a sheet. That's completely a lie. I don't even know where that came from. But what is the benefit of having, close bodily contact during sex or in your relationship? What's the benefit?
Sensuality.
Sensuality,
It's a physical
connection,
feeling.
closeness, cuddling, staying together. And then, what's fascinating is how specific and detailed the Talmud is, how concerned the Talmud is about sexual relations and what good sex should be. And that Jews, marriages were probably very strong. You married young, you had all these lessons and instructions of how to, please your wife so she would be happy and you would have this happy home. Everybody knew their place. And actually, and even it seems to me, I wonder what you think about this, even if it's an arranged marriage, which it could have been, do you think that if a husband treats his wife this way, wouldn't you think that love would grow? That how could you not love a man who gives you such great sex, basically, and treats you so beautifully? And we talked about last week how you should adorn your wife in beautiful clothes and jewels and, give your children everything. So compare this to the way most of the world viewed their wives and children in the ancient world. Would you see a difference between how they treated their wives? You're nodding your head, Lori. What are you thinking? You're muted. You're muted. Can you unmute?
Hard to unmute from the phone.
Now, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think in most other cultures at that time, women were sort of like chattel. So it would seem to me that this would make for much happier marriages and probably better chances of procreating often.
I've read this interesting, you probably all heard of this, the Will and Ariel Durant History of Civilization. Remember, there were these books, they were such detailed. And I have them from my grandmother. And I was looking up Jews, just Jews all over, see what they said. And they said in 2nd century Alexandria, the Jewish families tended to have less children, and love their children more than the normal population and love their daughters more. And they just seemed to be more happy families. It was noted like in the ancient world because there was this preciousness about the family. You didn't just have children to work or have children for, to marry off and make alliances and whatever. There was this, and this value of the wife that was different. I mean, I'm sure in other cultures, men valued their wives. Of course they did, but not as like a commandment. You know what I mean? Many people love their wives, but that like, this is what we do as Jews. This is how we treat our wives. This is what we teach from a young age. It's very unique. Susan, you have your hand up.
So I have a question about that with Will and Ariel Durant. To what do they attribute that? Alexandria was Hellenized, if you're talking at that time.
Right.
And how would it be that Greek culture would promote this?
I think it was the opposite of Greek culture. I think it was in spite of the Greek culture that they stood out in the Greek culture.
That's what I would think too, but then why wouldn't that be in other Hellenized regions of, in which Jews lived? So,
Well, that's what they, I mean, they, I don't know, they couldn't write about Jews everywhere. They wrote about them in different places, but I was reading, I don't know, I just found it. I was looking at it and they said it's noted that they were talking about, I guess, Alexandria and Alexander the Great and the whole culture. And they go into detail of all the different civilizations and populations. And the Jews stood out as having, not huge families, but having very loving families and loving their children more, seem to love their children more than other cultures. Sparta, how they treated their sons, exactly. And so anyway, okay. So it is very impressive. See the way, so far the Talmud is talking about marriage, and then it sort of changes. Let's see if I can find the place where it changes. Oh, this is Shmuley Bot. Is it pronounced Botiach? Boteach? Boteach. So now they go to kosher sex when he's talking about Judaism insists on a holistic approach to human love and sexuality, whereby they are one and the same and cannot be separated. Carnal love must be accompanied by heartfelt love, and attraction to the body must engender attraction to the soul. Well, that's sort of like the summing up. Okay, now suddenly the tables are turned. Okay, Lori, read this one.
A woman once came before Rabbi and said, Rabbi, I set a table before my husband. I prepared to make love with him, but he overturned it. He wanted to engage in anal intercourse. Rabbi replied, my daughter, the Torah has permitted you to him. What then can I do for you?
So he's saying it's allowed. You're his wife. He can do whatever he wants. That's the first. Okay, we're going to see a few of these and then we're going to talk about this. Okay, here's another one. A little more, Lori.
Since a man's wife is permitted to him, he may act with her in any manner whatsoever. He may have intercourse with her whenever he so desires and kiss any organ of her body he wishes. And he may have intercourse with her naturally or unnaturally, provided that he does not expend semen to no purpose. Nevertheless, it is a sign of piety not to show too much levity, but to sanctify himself at the time of intercourse.
Oh my God. And one more, this is like really annoying. Go ahead.
Once a woman came to Rabbi Judah and said to him, I have been raped. Judah said, but did you not find the experience pleasing? If you were a willing partner, you are forbidden to your husband. You are forbidden to you. The woman, suppose someone dipped his finger in honey and stuck it in your mouth on Yom Kippur. Would not the experience distress you at first, but after a while please you? So Judah accepted what she had to say. He declared her remitted to her husband. I don't get it.
Okay, so this was hard for me to understand too. I have been raped. I don't know if she was saying, was she complaining or was she just telling him? But did you find the experience pleasing? If you were a willing partner, you were forbidden to your husband. But did you not find the experience pleasing? The woman said, well, yeah, I guess in the end I did. So it was okay. I think this is wrong. If you were not, this is wrong. It should be if you were not a willing partner, you were forbidden to your husband. So he said, well, it would express, oh, wow. Okay, so that's pretty twisted. So basically she said, my husband raped me. And he said, well,
did you like
it pleasing? Because if you didn't, you can't, it's not allowed. And she said, well, ultimately, I guess I did. So it's permitted. But now this is a turnaround. So how do we reconcile these 2 points of view? You can do whatever you want to your wife. And then on the other hand, it says, don't force yourself on your wife.
But do we know that it was her husband that raped her?
She said it was her husband. Didn't she? Yeah, she said it was her husband.
Well, the rabbi asked about her husband.
Yeah, it was her husband. Oh. It was her husband. So the only thing I can think of is it's 1,000 years earlier is when the first thing happened. Or I guess the rabbi, I guess if you rape your wife, it's like a terrible thing. So he's trying to justify it so the husband wouldn't be in trouble. Saying, well, did you experience, did it feel okay in the end? She said, well, I guess by the end it did. But this idea of the man being able to do anything he wants with his wife versus the other thing. So
I didn't understand that.
okay. Two-person. Oh, Pam, go ahead.
So, my brain is trying to reconcile the two parts. And I'm wondering if what's happening in the rape is not so much that he raped her in completely forcing himself upon her, but that the rape was more of an initiation without foreplay.
Right.
Without foreplay. Oh, that's
Because
interesting.
remember that the first part said you basically have to have foreplay, and she has to be aroused, and you have to make sure you please her first, and all of these things. And maybe what this is saying is it's not rape just because he initiates it and you weren't quite there yet. It's a stretch, granted, but it is some almost reconciliation. I think you could take it in the wrong way and say your husband can rape you. But if you're going to make sense of the totality of it, I would look at it as saying, this is sex initiated without foreplay. And then maybe it comes around. Just a guess.
That's interesting. Also, it's interesting that it's like a husband has an obligation to please his wife, but it seems like a wife has an obligation to please her husband by letting him have sex anyway.
Without foreplay. Yeah.
Well, but the other thing I thought was interesting is in the passage just before, it says you can kiss her anywhere you want.
Right.
Which is interesting because that's in my mind, a tacit acceptance of oral sex.
Yes.
Like granting to the man to say, yeah, you can do that. Don't worry about it. Like, that's fine. And again, is just a permission to the men who might be like, oh, I'm not allowed to. So the rabbi says, no, go ahead. You can do that.
Right.
And maybe 1,000 years before, no one had to say it. Right. Because
No, this is from 1,000 years before. The one
this is the older.
The older one is this: you can kiss her anywhere you want. The newer one in the 13th century is arouse her, speak to her, love her, blah blah blah. Okay, Merle, did you have your hand up? Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm thinking that part of this is his or her definition of what pleasing sex would be or should be. I mean, is there a clear definition written down somewhere of what is appropriate to be pleasing? Or if the male, if she considers it rape, is it how the man approached her?
Right. Well,
or yeah.
To clear that up, I guess, the Igeret HaTzedek, whatever, in the 13th century said, okay, I'm clearing this up. This is what you're supposed to be doing,
right,
as opposed to just the Talmud, I think. Okay, Susan?
Yes, I was confused with some of this. I was glad what Pamela brought up too, that, yeah, but go back, because I was confused. She just said I was raped. Did she necessarily, was her husband? And
Yeah,
you
it was her
said
husband.
yes.
It was her husband.
And we don't know what the definitions of the rape was. And so Pam brought some of that up, maybe he didn't do the sweet talk and that foreplay. Then the other thing, the ending is whether she was permitted to her husband or not. That's another thing. So what is meant by that?
Okay, so if you did not enjoy it, then it was rape, is what we're getting.
Right, I got all that.
And so
Committed
I
to
guess
her husband.
it's forbidden. I have to look at the law, but I guess if your husband rapes you or forces you, there's some kind of abstinence or some kind of punishment, or I don't
That's
know.
what I'm saying.
Something like that. It doesn't explain that.
It doesn't explain, it doesn't say you're gonna be whipped 5 times.
No,
you
you
know,
wouldn't be.
or barred from the community, or that your husband can divorce you. It's like permitted to her husband, not by her husband, unless that,
Is that grounds
deposition.
for divorce?
Yeah, see, that's what I'm saying.
Maybe. That's interesting. Okay, so, Penina,
Yeah. Okay, can
you're
you hear
on.
me?
You're on. Yeah.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I think the whole thing starts with the sanctity of life altogether. It starts out where there is a sentence in the Bible that says, do not, how would I say, waste your sperm in vain.
Right. Right.
I think that was the beginning. So to realize that human life is important. Then I think it's a development of us being different than the other nations. It says, and I should make you above the other people. There is a sentence like that. I think the whole idea was to stay away from the rituals and the habits of other people that didn't sanctify women specifically, because they were sacrificed to the gods. They will be like what do you call it, a pilegesh, like a concubine.
Concubines.
And all this stuff. I think it's definitely to make us different than the other people and make the woman's life valuable as a person and not just an object that you either throw away when she's not satisfying you, and it's all in the man of the man. And specifically, all the rituals that were involved, specifically homosexuality. So if you are using a woman that way, also, it's forbidden.
No, it's not.
Because you are throwing away.
Forbidden.
It's not forbidden, but they're saying it that in a way that
you can't
you waste your
ejaculate. You
sperm.
can't ejaculate, but you could do
Okay,
it.
right. That's it. It's a
But
part of it. You have to value people's life and a woman's life also, specifically because the way that they were treated within the other nations, in many nations, in different ways.
I think you're right. But what I find fascinating, and I'm curious, is how sensual the permission of how permissive sensuality is. And
it has again to do with not spending the seed for nothing.
That's fine.
The value of the family, the value of this whole unit.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I'm just talking about the actual foreplay and the caressing and all of the Song of Songs behavior is actually, I mean, I've read this before, but you forget about how sensuality and sexuality is considered normal, and it is sanctified and permissive, and
it was a part of nature.
But in the Christian world, it's not that way at all.
That's exactly what I said, to separate us from the other people.
But okay, so I want to look a little more.
Can I ask just one little question about this separation? I'm wondering, it seems to me anyway, that these writings sort of codify what already existed in the world, meaning, everybody who was educated and in the know, so to speak, knew to caress a woman, to take these things, that women are sensual, that sex is supposed to be this amazing experience, blah, 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 and an integral part of life. But they're not like imposing it from the outside, saying this is what you have to do, and it wasn't already being done. My guess is this is what the culture was anyway, and it's just a way to pass it on.
I don't think so.
No.
Does anybody? I think it was very brutal. I think a lot of sex was very brutal. Just wham, bam, thank you, man. If any of you ever saw Outlander, I only watched the first couple of seasons, but she goes to like 16th century Scotland, and she's from 20th century it's a time travel movie, 20th century in England. And the guy has no idea how to have sex. Basically, he teaches him everything. He didn't even know about kissing. He didn't know anything. He just knew stick it in and that's it. And she actually had to teach him everything. And he was like, oh my God, I actually think I believe in like certain countries like India and China, or Japan rather, there was a tradition of sensuality and sexuality in those countries, but I don't think
Kama
in Europe.
Sutra. There's
Yeah,
a Kama-
I think India, but I don't think Europe. I feel like
Well, but what I'm saying is, in the Jewish culture, was it already what we did as a Jewish culture and this codified it? I don't mean
in the Jewish
the
culture,
outside.
I think, from Song of Songs, it's a huge influence, that we read, and that you taught your sons how to treat a woman and how to treat your wife. And if this was, you would love being with your wife, you would love being married or whatever, and you wouldn't stray, because to have this experience is very enriching. Okay, Penina, we have 5 more minutes.
In 1 minute, in China, they threw the girls into the river. Not too long ago. I would talk
I'm
maybe.
not talking about that. I said,
Yeah,
I meant Japan.
because she couldn't
I meant
walk.
Japan.
So
I meant Japan,
if
not
you're
China.
bringing China, forget China.
No, Japan. Okay, hold on. All right. Okay, so let's continue here. So this is a completely other one. This is the Rambam Maimonides, who says, the intent of sexual relations is the preservation of the species and not only pleasure. The aspect of pleasure was introduced only to motivate the created beings towards the ultimate goal.
Right.
The proof is that this desire and pleasure cease after ejaculation. So he's saying, he's a doctor. He's saying that sexual pleasure is all in the purpose or toward the goal of procreation, because once you ejaculate, of course, he's talking about the man, you're spent, you're done. This was the entire goal for which our instincts are aroused. If the goal were pleasure, satisfaction would continue as long as man desired. So this is the doctor's point of view from like the 12th century, that, and then here's this other thing. During intercourse, a man may do with his wife whatever he pleases. Ay vey. An analogy suggests itself, which means that it comes from the slaughterhouse. A man may eat it any way he wishes, raw with salt, roasted, or stewed. Ew. So that is like 1,000 years before. Okay. Now this is all about, okay. Now we've talked about the physical, the sensual, emotional. Now there's like the mental or intellectual component. So Lori, do you want to read this? Similarly,
the sages forbade a man to have marital relations while thinking of another woman, nor may he initiate sex while drunk, nor out of spite or hatred, nor may he rape her or initiate sex while she is afraid, nor may they have sex while either of them are excommunicated, nor after he has decided to divorce her. If the husband does any of those things, the children will not be proper citizens, but brazen, rebellious people and criminals. Yike.
So, what is the Talmud saying about your state of mind and how it influences your physical, how does your mentality influence your physicality? What is the Talmud saying?
And your offspring.
And your offspring. Where is this written?
This is in the Talmud.
It didn't say it down below. Let's see.
Oh, okay. I'll show you.
I have the Jewish question. So where is it written?
Okay, it's part of this, but I didn't want to go into, which was about it's from Mishnah Torah, forbidden intercourse.
Okay.
So the Mishnah Torah Maimonides is like his summary of everything in the Talmud. Instead of having to read all the arguments, Maimonides wrote this incredible book where you can just look up the topic and it will give you the conclusion. So this part that I jumped was about how you're not supposed to sleep with forbidden people, incest or relatives or whatever. So I just skipped that. But here, this is also in the Mishnah Torah, all of these things of how to have sex. You're not even supposed, and if you do, the repercussion, interestingly, will be you'll have a terrible family life, because psychologically, think about it. What kind of marriage and family life are they having if this is the way they relate to each other sexually? What kind of house?
Doesn't sound like they have a very good relationship.
It would be a very hateful,
Contentious.
Stressful to say the least.
atmosphere. And so Maimonides is saying, or the Talmud is saying, if you do these things, you're going to destroy your children. Your children are going to be rebellious. They're going to be criminal. And how many criminals do we know or read about had sexual abuse or came from terrible home life and all this stuff? And so Maimonides was, he was a doctor, he was a philosopher, he was a teacher. He observed human nature on so many levels, and he came to these conclusions about that. Okay, let's just see. We have drop more time. I kind of, wanted to pick stuff that I thought was really interesting. This is not so interesting, blah, 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 blah. Oh, okay. This is interesting. I'm going to read this to you so you understand what it is. Rav Judah said in Rav's name, a man once conceived a passion for a certain woman, and his heart was consumed by his burning desire. His life was in danger. Okay. A man was so in love with a woman, he was getting sick. He was pining away. When the doctors were consulted, they said his only cure is that she should submit. So the doctor said the only cure is he should be allowed to have sex with her. Now, it's not saying anything how she felt about him. She should submit. Okay, she has to let him rape her, basically, and to save his life. Thereupon the sages said, let him die rather than she shall yield. So the rabbi said, no way, let him die. Then said the doctors, let her stand nude before him so he'll feel better. They answered, sooner let him die. Then the doctors said, let her converse with him from behind a fence. Let him die, the sages replied, rather than she should converse with him from behind a fence. Now Rabbi Jacob ben Edi and Rabbi Samuel ben Nachmani dispute therein. They argued, these two rabbis. This is real Talmud, where you see the argument. One said that she was a married woman. The other said she was unmarried. Okay, so would this make a difference?
Sure.
Now, this is intelligible on the view that she was a married woman, but on the latter that she was unmarried. Why such severity? Okay, so if she were a married woman, she can't do it, but why couldn't she talk to him behind a fence at least? If she were unmarried, they're saying, why so severe? And then Rabbi Papa, this is great, because of the disgrace to her family. Okay, so you can't do it married or unmarried because of the shame. And Rabbi Acha, the son of Rabbi Ika, said that the daughters of Israel may not be immorally dissolute. Then why not marry her? Okay, so I love this. This is real Talmud. So they said, we don't want to do it because then we're encouraging daughters to sleep, take their clothes off, to talk to strange men. We don't want our daughters to be immoral. Then why not marry her? Then why not let him marry her if she's unmarried? Marriage would not assuage his passion, even as Rabbi Isaac said, since the destruction of the temple, sexual pleasure has been taken from those who practice it lawfully and given to sinners. As it is written, stolen waters are sweet and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. Oh, so that's interesting that his desire, wow, I don't know if you get that. It's really interesting. The forbidden part of it is what makes her so desirable. And that's why it's terrible what he's doing. He wants to break laws. He wants to have her in secret. He wants to do that. And the rabbi said, no, this man's a sinner. Doesn't have a pure heart. He's not courting her. He doesn't love her. He's lusting for her. And I'm going to end on this. If we remember the story of Tamar, King David's daughter, where her half-brother lusted for her so terribly, and he basically raped her and then threw her out and hated her once his lust was assuaged. And I would imagine the rabbis look at that and say, this kind of lust is not going to be a good husband, and it's not going to assuage who this person is. So that's just a little bit of the Talmud and Torah's view of sex, love, and how the Song of Songs permeates all of it, I think. Yes, Pam.
Just really quick question, interesting thought is that never once in all of their debate from that portion do they ever say, because the woman doesn't want to.
Right. But we don't even
Family
know.
disgrace, this other reason, it's bad for the man, it's all of these things,
immoral.
but never, it's immoral, but never is it because she just doesn't want to, don't make her. That's interesting.
Yes, you're right. You're right. But perhaps a young girl could be sweet talked, could be convinced. Look, the doctors, think of these doctors.
Actors.
Unbelievable. And the rabbis, let him die. Let him die. I love that. I love that about the rabbis. Anyway, it was great to study with you.
Thank
and,
you. This was
Thank you. This
wonderful.
was
See you
great.
next time. Okay. Bye.
Thank
Thank you.
I thank you.